Our very own Brock Pierce and even Logan Paul are receiving death threats and their property vandalized in Puerto Rico since they moved there for tax breaks. The entire Puerto Rico as a whole is on the verge of an uprising. Why is this happening? Well, here's a piece of local news and then we'll talk about it.
I told you that tensions are rising in Puerto Rico, and here's another example. Flyers like these can be found in San Juan, and they read, "This is what our colonizers look like." This is written in a major highway in San Juan, and if you've been following my reporting, you know that there is backlash against tax breaks that are inviting wealthy people, mostly from the continental US, to move to Puerto Rico.
Getting crazy here in California, paying taxes.
Everybody is leaving.
And for what? Because the potholes in the streets are not fixed.
Homeless people.
Homeless people everywhere. A dearth of employment. COVID not handled the right. I don't know.
So as many of you guys know, in Puerto Rico, they have instituted some tax breaks that are very advantageous for investors. More specifically, you don't have to pay capital gains tax. So this applies to regular investments like stocks and crypto. So a lot of day traders and investors are moving to Puerto Rico and have been moving to Puerto Rico over the past 5-6 years or so. And it is creating a big wealth inequality in Puerto Rico. Now, I don't know if you guys know this. I know I've talked about moving to Puerto Rico, not personally, but I've laid it out there as an option to avoid taxes. What happens is, if you haven't been living in Puerto Rico for at least 10 years, you have to prove you haven't lived there for 10 years. So the locals don't even qualify for this, right? You can't have lived in Puerto Rico. They incentivize you by giving you no capital gains to move there, right? So if you have a resident there and you stay there at least 6 months out of the year or 6 months in a day, then you don't have to pay capital gains tax. The problem is that the people moved there, they're not necessarily job creators. I mean, they can be, but you understand that this is not an active labor market, in the sense that if you have a lot of money from passive investments, you're not going to move to Puerto Rico to hire a bunch of people. You're day trading. Maybe you got an executive assistant. Maybe you got some a secretary, people like that. But you're not creating tons of jobs. Also, it was reported recently that Brock Pierce bought the W Hotel. So what's happening? Logan Paul recently moved over there. Here's a clip of him talking about it.
Getting crazy here in California, paying taxes.
Everybody is leaving.
And for what? Because the potholes in the streets are not fixed.
Homeless people.
Homeless people everywhere. A dearth of employment. COVID not handled the right. I don't know.
So he recently bought a $13 million mansion in Puerto Rico. So all these people, a lot more people are moving there. Thousands of crypto people and investors are moving there. And by investors, I mean not people that necessarily are going to invest in Puerto Rico, but investors that are going there to avoid capital gains. This is causing property values to skyrocket. People are also buying up, homes and turning them into Airbnbs, because obviously you move there, you want more people to come, right? And what people don't understand is that Puerto Rico is not a state, it's a territory, right? But if it was a state, it would have a higher crime rate based on population density than any other state in the United States. 40-something% of the population live beneath the poverty line. That is unheard of in any other state. The crime rates are crazy. So even though there's these tax incentives, every time I hear people talk about Puerto Rico, I'm like, man, most Puerto Ricans are leaving. It is a tough place to live. And when you go there, yeah, things maybe used to be cheap and stuff. They're cheap for a reason. There's not a lot of resources. The infrastructure is very shaky. Recently, a hurricane came through there, made all the property values crash. And so all these investors, people are going in there, snatching up stuff, but they're not really creating jobs. They're not really offsetting this poverty. They're just creating a deeper divide. And Puerto Ricans apparently are not having it. I don't know if you guys know a lot about Puerto Rico, but there's a real push that they want statehood or they want to be independent. But being under the thumb of the United States, they don't get to vote for president. They don't get to take advantage of these tax incentives that all these rich people are coming. So they don't like it. They don't like it one bit. And I can understand why. I really can understand why. So here you go, Brock Pierce buying the W Hotel and living it up. And you have all these poor people around there. And that's why they're vandalizing property. There's death threats. I wouldn't want to be in Puerto Rico right now. So what's going to happen? I don't know. But anytime you think, well, I'm going to move away from the United States, or I'm going to switch over and go into territory to avoid taxes. It's the small things that get to you. And the biggest one is that you're going to be a foreigner. You know, here in the United States, I think we're kind of sheltered. You know, we see prejudice a certain way, and it's overall within, you know, the, you know, society, socially, it's frowned upon, at least, you know, like it's discouraged. A lot of other places, if you're a foreigner, nobody's saying prejudice is bad, you know. They can be very homogeneous communities, and you're always going to be an outsider. You're not going to be welcome, especially if you have money. And people think, well, I'm going to move here, I'm going to move to Japan, or I'll move here, or I'll move to Monte Carlo, I'm going to go here. And they get there, and they realize there is a lot of prejudice. The same thing goes in Dubai and stuff, you know, and you may have a poor infrastructure, you may have a hard time getting packages. The simple things, air conditioning, it's the simple things, the small things that get you in the end. So the grass is not always greener on the other side, you know, and I'll dig in and I'll make some videos talking about options. If you really are tired, you want to become an expat, you want to leave the United States, you want to find greener pastures, well, let's talk about the realities of moving places. And I'm telling you, Puerto Rico, it's not one of them. That's why I'm not in Puerto Rico, and that's why I wouldn't go in Puerto Rico. But thank you guys for watching. Tell me what you think about what's happening in Puerto Rico. Do you think this is going to escalate? I definitely think it's going to escalate until something is done. But it is it's a very precarious situation. It worries me. I wouldn't want to be Brock Beers or Logan Paul in Puerto Rico right now. But you know, I bet you neither one of them spend any substantial amount of time in the country, especially Logan Paul at least. But anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. As always, buy red and sell green.